Hi everyone, I'm Jeff Miracola, fantasy artist and illustrator, and welcome to another edition of Watch Me Deface This Sketchbook. This drawing that I am doing is done on the inside cover of an art book of mine, a sketchbook really, a book of drawings. The surface is called chipboard. It's like a very dense cardboard. It's not the best surface to work on, but it is fun and it has its own special qualities. I didn't have any kind of plan as I was doing this sketch. This is ultimately what I consider just a color sketch. It only took me about an hour to hour 15 to do this entire color sketch. No plan, just putting pencil to paper basically and seeing what I come up with. Started drawing the head and just let it grow from there. Most of the time I use ebony pencils when I do my drawing, but occasionally I'll use mechanical pencils as well. There's really no rhyme or reason to it. Sometimes it just depends on my mood. Sometimes I don't want the struggle of the soft lead that you find in ebony pencils. Sometimes I just want it to be easier. I use the mechanical pencil because it's got a tighter line and I don't have to keep sharpening it. Here I'm just using a low Cornell brush, probably a 3-0 or a 5-0 brush. I dipped in a waterproof Black India ink by Kohinoor. It's important that I use waterproof ink because a little bit later in this video I start adding color with acrylic paints, watered down acrylic paints. If this wasn't waterproof ink, then that black ink would run. Again, I'm just making this up as I go along. I mean, this is really just, sitting down for an hour and sketching, having fun, seeing where it leads me. And I like this stage too, because I really enjoy inking a lot. I never used to. I used to be really, really bad at it, but I've gotten a better handle on inking over the past decade. And I think that's because of all the painting that I've done in my career. All that brush handling has made me better at inking. I don't often use pens for my inking. I almost always use a brush, or more recently I've been getting into brush pens as well. I don't use any brush pens on this drawing in this video. Just a regular brush, but I love the varied line weight that I get from a brush. I like the control, being able to get thin and thick lines. I just can't get the same thing with mechanical pens. With mechanical pens, the line weight is always the same, and I know I can do different things with pressure with mechanical pens as well, but I just never got into it. I never went down that route to learn how to use mechanical pens effectively. We can only do so much, right? Got to focus on certain things and on certain tools, and I happen to focus on brushes. So you can see I'm treating this like line work, or like as if I were sitting down to do the line work for a comic or for a coloring book. I'm not doing a lot of shading with the ink. I'm not putting in large areas of black ink That's because I'm going to be doing all that shading with the color, with those acrylic paints that I'll use a little bit later in the video. Right now, my concern is just getting all those lines right, you know, getting the anatomy right for the creature and creating elegant lines and shapes, things that make sense. This is why I say it's so important for you to learn anatomy as a fantasy artist. Because I'm not using any reference for this, I'm just sitting down and drawing. And I wouldn't have been able to sit down and draw this monster's bicep and delt and forearm and everything if I hadn't taken anatomy classes most of my life. If I hadn't done figure drawing in school or after school, in private figure drawing sessions and whatnot, or just studying anatomy from books. If I hadn't done that, I wouldn't be able to sit down and do this from memory. A lot of young artists, a lot of beginning artists want to jump right into creating awesome images, and they skip the fundamentals of learning to draw. Because no matter what you do with your art, paintings, drawings, ink drawings, whatever they are, the basis for all of it is going to be drawing. If you can't draw well, oftentimes your paintings don't look good either. That's just the way it is. You've got to be able to have those fundamentals, and figure drawing is one of those things that will take your art to the next level. It really will. I mean, if you can draw the human figure and you can draw animal anatomy and things like that, you'll really see a difference in your fantasy art. And I'm not talking about trying to learn the muscle groups and the bones and all the names of everything, and that's not necessary. What you've got to learn is what the muscles look like, what they look like in motion, and you don't have to study anatomy like Leonardo da Vinci would have studied anatomy. You want to study anatomy so you can understand structure and movement and the dynamics of anatomy, whether that be human or animal. And spend a lot of time observing. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. People will say, Jeff, how do I get better at drawing anatomy, or how do I get better at drawing this or that? Well, obviously practice drawing all the time, but you've got to be observing all the time too. I am constantly observing stuff. Everywhere I go, the way people walk or their mannerisms and, everything. You go to the zoo, you watch the animals. It's constant observation of life, whether that be anatomy and lighting, mood and composition. You see it everywhere. As an artist, you're really never turning it off. That ability to kind of observe the world around you. And you'll get to that point where you observe life so much that when you got to sit down to draw something like a rabbit, you can just draw a rabbit because you know what? You've seen a rabbit so much that you know what it looks like, and you don't necessarily need to go hunting down anatomy for that. Alright, so after my drawing is complete here, I just erase all those lines with a kneaded eraser. The ink dries rather quickly, so it's not a big deal. And I jump right into painting with some watered down acrylics. Now, I haven't sealed this ink drawing at all beforehand. In some of my other videos you will have seen me do that, and that's because in those I was probably not using waterproof ink. But I'm using waterproof ink in this one. So there's no need for me to take this drawing outdoors and spray it with spray fix to lock that ink drawing in place. Because no matter what, this watered down acrylics are not going to mess up the black ink. Now here I'm leaving a little bit of unpainted area on one side of the monster's face. That's me saying this is where the light's coming from. This light is going to be coming from the right side of the monster, and I'll give him some of that rim lighting that I like so much on my paintings and drawings. And it's just a matter of building it up, using just a burnt sienna brown to start with, and then darkening it a little bit further with some burnt umber brown. I also know too that when I'm working on this surface, the chipboard, when I initially put the paint down, it looks really rich and dark and whatnot, but once it dries, it starts to lighten up a little bit and lose some of its intensity. So sometimes I will have a tendency to put down a lot more paint than you might think I should, but that's because I know it's going to soak into that chipboard and disappear a little bit. Again, I'm just figuring this out as I go. There's been no conscious effort at the beginning of this drawing or painting stage for me to plan it out. I'm just picking a color that I think would look nice, in this case the blue against the brown, and I'm just going with it. On the horn here, you can see I'm just putting straight water down first, and that's because I want this to happen. As soon as I put that paint on it, I want the paint to kind of run a little bit, create a little bit of shading for me. It's a tricky balance too when you're working on this chipboard. Now, I should say that this chipboard is something that I'm painting on simply because it's the cover of my sketchbook. I wouldn't necessarily recommend working on this material for client work. I mean, I suppose you could. There's really nothing wrong with it. I always thought of this material as something that I would just do sketches on, color sketches like this. It's not something I would ever do a full-fledged painting on. But look at all that interesting stuff that happens in the horn because I put that water down. You get all these really interesting shapes and the water running together and, you know, creating a lot of fun stuff. But here's another example of what I said earlier when I said when I put the paint down it's really dark, and then when it dries it's not. Look at that on the horn there. Once it dried, see how light that turned? That's something that happens with this chipboard. If I want to return that horn to being a little darker, then I have to go over it again, and sometimes a third time. And you've got to be careful working on the chipboard too, because I didn't seal it, the chipboard is, you know, soaking up some of that paint, that water. If I put too much water onto it, then I could severely warp the chipboard. So it's a delicate balance. Knowing what to do comes with experience. Experimenting and trying this a few times so that you know just how much water you can get away with putting down on this surface. I've done some in the past on this chipboard, and too much water, and all of a sudden it really curls up, and then you've got to put a pile of books on top of this thing for a couple of days to get it to flatten out again. The nice thing about the chipboard is it acts a little bit like watercolor paper in that the paint you put down on it stays wet for just a little bit longer, which is really nice because I can do stuff like that where I put a color down, go back to my palette, grab a little bit more paint, come back to it, and I can work into it, and it's still got that wetness so that it gives me a nice blends and the color runs together real nicely. Now, you know me, I can't get away from my green gold. I do love that color. So I decided that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make that green gold the highlight for this piece. So all those areas that I left unpainted before, I start to work over with the green gold. Now, I remember right there when I painted that entire horn with the green gold, I was like, oh, that's what I want for this piece. I want the whole piece to be warm like that. So, like I said, I was making this up as I go. I decided that, well, I'll just do the green gold for all the highlights, but then when I saw what I did on the horn there, I was like, oh, I'll just cover the whole thing in green gold. We'll make the whole painting warm. Why not? You know me, I get carried away with that color. See, now my entire monster is bathed in yellow light. But it's nice, it kind of took all those blues that I had on his head and the horns and pushed them green, and I don't know, it feels a lot better to me. Just lay in a color on the cheek like that, and then I can come back into it with some water to soften up the edges of it and blend it into the colors that are already there. I do like the texture that I get with chipboard. You know, you've got some of that stippled surface, that little interesting texture to it that permeates across your entire painting. I think it's pretty neat. And here I just felt that I needed to have a color that was pretty opposite the greens and yellows so that the creature would stand out against it. And what better than a blood red, right? Nice and bright. Now we get into the fun part of highlights. I love putting highlights on the painting because that's the stuff that makes it come to life. So here I just put down some white paint with one brush, and I grabbed another brush that was clean and just kind of dry brush that paint a little bit, move it around and try to work it in to the background. There's no water added to that new clean brush. I'm just dabbing away, wipe it off, and then come back and work into it so that I can kind of create that blending. Again, no water added to it, just dry brushing that white paint, dabbing it away, dab, dab, dab. The same thing happens with white paint that happens with the other paints when you're working on chipboard, and that is, it looks very intense at first when you put it on, and then when it dries it will soak into the chipboard and dull down a little bit. That's why if you look on the face of that monster there, where I already put the white on the nose and the right side of the face, it's not as intense as what you see me putting down with the brush right now. I'll go back into that and add a little bit more paint, a few more layers, to get the intensity of that white up a little bit. This is fun. You know, it's good to do this once in a while, to just sit down and sketch and work on something. Don't really have a plan. Maybe you have a general idea, but choose an easy subject to draw. In this case, you know, a monster head and an arm. I mean, it's not a complicated composition. He's not wearing all kinds of gear and armor or anything like that. It's just a simple drawing that you can sit down and work on and put some time in on working on your techniques, because that's really what's important here. I mean, there's a lot of things that are important here, you know, how to draw anatomy and, you know, drawing monsters and using your imagination to come up with these ideas, sure. But sometimes you just want to sit down and work on your techniques, your painting techniques, your blending and coloring techniques. And giving yourself something simple to work on is sometimes really key. Don't overthink it. You don't always have to sit down and give yourself something complex and multiple figures and a character wearing all kinds of crazy armor and gear and things like that that's going to keep you busy for hours and hours and hours. You know, give yourself something that you can do in an hour to an hour and a half. See what it is you can pull off in that time. Once everything dries, I grab my trusty white Prismacolor pencil and just start drawing over it a little bit. That's the fun part I like about doing these mixed media color sketches, is kind of using all these different materials, the ink and the paint and the colored pencils. And if I could glue macaroni to this and put glitter and sparkles on it, I probably would too. Well, maybe I should do that for the next one. It's like craft time for monsters. But I do enjoy it. Very relaxing. And like I said, again, it gives you a chance to sit down and work on your techniques and hone some of your skills. Put a little too much color pencil down, just rub it away like that. Rub it in to blend it. You can start to see how this could be a really fun technique to do for an even larger project. I mean, this drawing, like I said, is only done in an hour and 15 minutes. You know, if I sat down and used this technique to do something over a matter of days, it could get pretty cool and pretty intense, and you could probably have an awful lot of fun with the different textures and the blending and everything that you can do. That cross-hatching is pretty important too. That's something else you can practice. I mean, you can see how those lines are following the curvature of all the muscles. That helps accentuate the shape of those muscles by knowing which direction your hatching lines should be going in order to give form to that muscle. And that's it, all done. This sketch goes off to some happy home. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something by watching this. Even if you didn't learn anything, I hope you just enjoyed the process of watching me create it, because I had a good time doing it. Take care, and until next time, bye-bye.